I cannot help but feel the weight of history which surrounds us and which reminds us of the vital parliamentary traditions.
In this video, we are going to take you inside one of the most consequential power shifts in the history of the British monarchy. Not a shift that was announced in a press conference, not one that was voted on or constitutionally arranged. A shift that happened quietly, deliberately, and in the full knowledge of the people inside those palace walls. A shift that by the time the public fully understands its scale, will already be complete and irreversible. We are talking about King Charles III, a man who waited longer than any heir in history to wear the crown, now voluntarily transferring the real authority of that crown to his son. We are talking about Prince William, who has spent years warning his family about exactly the kind of catastrophe that has now arrived, finally being given the power to act on those warnings. We are talking about Queen Camilla, who has become the unexpected obstacle in that transfer. Not out of ambition, not out of malice, but out of something far more human and far more complicated than either of those things. And we are talking about Princess Kate, who is no longer simply standing beside her husband at public events, but is actively in the room, actively in the meetings, actively shaping the decisions that will determine whether the British monarchy survives this decade with its credibility intact. This is not tabloid speculation. The sources are credible, the evidence is documented, and the internal power dynamics of Buckingham Palace have shifted in ways that are now visible to anyone paying close attention. So stay with us, because what is unfolding inside that palace right now is the most dramatic reshaping of royal power in living memory, and we are going to break it down completely. To understand how we got here, you need to understand what happened on February 19, 2026. Mark that date. Historians may one day point to it as the moment the modern British monarchy was forced to confront its deepest contradictions and chose, finally, to act. On that day, Prince Andrew, Duke of York, son of the late Queen Elizabeth II, a man who had been shielded and quietly managed by the palace machine for decades, was arrested. The charges were explosive, allegedly sharing confidential government documents with individuals connected to the Jeffrey Epstein network. Let that fully land. A sitting member of the British royal family, arrested on charges directly tied to the most toxic, most globally scrutinized criminal case of the 21st century, the palace did not just go into crisis mode, it went into free fall. Within hours, every major news organization in the world had reporters outside the gates of Buckingham Palace. Social media erupted. Politicians in Westminster began fielding questions they desperately did not want to answer. And inside the palace itself, the corridors were alive with urgent, whispered conversations. The people who were supposed to manage exactly this kind of catastrophe were frozen. Almost everyone was frozen. But not William. According to multiple sources close to the royal family, Prince William had been quietly preparing for this moment for years. Not hoping for it, not planning for it in some cynical, calculating way, but bracing for it because he had seen the trajectory more clearly than almost anyone else in that family, and he had been sounding the alarm about it for years. Royal commentator Omid Scobie described Charles as having effectively handed over real operational control in the immediate aftermath of Andrew's arrest, noting that Charles had shown a consistent preference for stepping back from direct crisis involvement, even when those crises threatened the very institution he had waited his entire life to lead. Read that carefully. The sitting king preferring not to be directly involved in a crisis that threatened his family's survival as the ruling house of Great Britain. That single reality tells you everything you need to know about why William has become not just important, but genuinely indispensable. But William's rise to real authority did not begin on February 19, 2026. It began years earlier, in the wreckage of a different scandal, one that most people thought had been quietly managed and put to bed. Cast your mind back to November 2019. Prince Andrew sat down with the BBC for what was supposed to be a controlled, carefully managed interview. An opportunity to address the growing questions about his friendship with Jeffrey Epstein and clear the air once and for all. What followed was one of the most catastrophically misjudged pieces of crisis communication in royal history. His explanations were unconvincing. His apparent lack of remorse for associating with a convicted sex offender was staggering. His attempt to use a medical condition as an alibi, the infamous claim that he could not sweat, became instant global mockery. And while the world watched that interview with a mixture of horror and disbelief, William watched it with something different: cold fury. According to multiple royal sources, William had been warning about Andrew's behavior and judgment for years before that interview. After the BBC disaster, he went directly to both Charles, then still Prince of Wales, and to the late Queen Elizabeth II. His message was not diplomatic. It was stark and unambiguous. Andrew needed to be removed from royal duties immediately, not quietly managed, not temporarily sidelined, fully removed, no half measures. At the time, those warnings were largely ignored. Queen Elizabeth, fiercely protective of her son, resisted decisive action. Charles found himself caught, as he so often did, between loyalty to family and concern for the institution. The palace chose the path it almost always chose when forced to choose between protecting a person and protecting the monarchy's reputation. It chose the person. William reportedly made his position clear to senior royals at the time that the monarchy's relationship with the public was hanging by a thread, that protecting the institution had to take precedence over protecting any individual, regardless of their blood or their title, and that the cost of continued association with Andrew would be paid not by Andrew himself, but by the crown and by the public trust that the monarchy depends on for its very legitimacy. Those words fell on deaf ears in 2019. By 2026, they had become prophecy. Now, with Andrew arrested and Charles fighting his own battle with cancer, William is no longer the heir waiting patiently in the wings. He is, by every credible account, the man actually making the decisions that matter. To fully understand why William's ascent to real power is happening right now, in 2026, and not in 5 or 10 years' time, you have to understand the extraordinary physical and emotional weight that King Charles III has been carrying since the moment he put on the crown. Charles became king in September 2022. He was 73 years old, the oldest person ever to ascend the British throne. He had waited longer than any heir in history. His entire life had been lived in preparation for a role that kept receding into the distance. And then finally it came. And then barely 17 months after his coronation, his body began to fail him. In February 2024, King Charles was diagnosed with cancer. The specific type was never publicly disclosed, and the palace managed the flow of medical information with surgical precision, but treatment began immediately. Throughout 2024 and into 2025, Charles continued his public duties, appearances, engagements, diplomatic functions, while quietly undergoing treatment. It was by any objective measure a remarkable act of duty and personal discipline. A man in his 70s, newly crowned after a lifetime of waiting, facing a serious illness, and choosing to keep showing up. There is something genuinely admirable in that, even for those who are skeptical about the monarchy as an institution. But here is the second blow that most people have not fully registered in terms of its combined impact. In March 2024, Princess Kate, the Princess of Wales, the most popular and arguably the most strategically important royal in the family, announced her own cancer diagnosis. She had undergone abdominal surgery, and following the discovery of cancer cells, she began a course of preventative chemotherapy. She stepped back from public duties for several months. Consider what that moment looked like from inside the palace walls. The king was fighting cancer. His daughter-in-law, the woman who had been doing the most to modernize the monarchy's public image, to connect it to younger generations, to make it feel relevant and warm and human, was fighting cancer. The two people most critical to the institution's future were both in treatment simultaneously. That is a level of concentrated fragility at the very apex of the monarchy that is almost without precedent in modern times. According to reporting from multiple royal sources, Charles was already seriously considering a significant transfer of responsibilities to William by 2025 and 2026. A source familiar with those internal discussions noted that while Charles carries the stubbornness of a man who has waited decades for something, those around him had increasingly arrived at the same quiet conclusion that William and Kate would be assuming effective control of the throne within that time frame, whether anyone officially announced it or not. Palace officials publicly denied the rumors of a rapid transition. They always do. But in the monarchy, as in most institutions of power, actions speak considerably louder than official denials. In 2025, King Charles made a decision that to most outside observers probably looked like a minor administrative update. He granted William and Kate the authority to issue royal warrants, the ability to publicly endorse brands and products on behalf of the crown. You might be thinking, so what? In the language of the monarchy, it matters enormously. Royal warrants have historically been one of the most closely guarded privileges of the crown. Monarchs have controlled them jealously for centuries. They are not just commercial endorsements. They are symbolic statements about where royal authority is vested and who speaks for the crown. The fact that Charles extended that privilege to William and Kate was not a matter of administrative convenience. It was a deliberate and meaningful signal that the center of gravity had shifted. And it was visible to anyone who understood the language. Now we come to the most personally complicated, most genuinely human, and in some ways most morally ambiguous dimension of this entire story. Queen Camilla has become, in the spring of 2026, the unexpected obstacle nobody saw coming. And the flashpoint is a friendship, a 50-year friendship that reaches all the way back to before either of the women involved had any connection to the royal family. Her relationship with Sarah Ferguson, the ex-wife of Prince Andrew, Sarah Ferguson's name now appears in the Epstein files released by the United States Department of Justice. To be precise and fair, there is no evidence of criminal wrongdoing on her part that needs to be stated clearly, but the released documents reveal that she had direct contact with Epstein and that at points of personal financial difficulty, she appeared to solicit financial help from him. In one particularly striking message from October 2009, she wrote to Epstein urgently asking for money when her businesses were struggling. That is the association. That is the connection, and in William's view, that is the problem. His position is not ambiguous, and he has not tried to make it ambiguous. The only safe strategy for the monarchy right now, in the middle of the most explosive, most damaging royal scandal in a generation, is a complete, clean, public break from anyone connected to Andrew and to the Epstein case. No exceptions, no gradations, no allowances for personal history or long friendship. A clean break, visible to the public, demonstrating that the palace understands the seriousness of what has happened. Camilla sees it entirely differently. She and Sarah Ferguson have been close friends since the 1970s. That friendship predates the royal family by decades. It predates the scandals by a generation. Camilla values loyalty, deep, long-standing, unconditional personal loyalty, as a core part of who she is. And she believes that ending a 50-year friendship because of what she regards as guilt by association is not just institutionally excessive, she believes it is morally wrong. Now pause here for a moment, because this is genuinely not a simple question with an obvious answer. There are people of intelligence and goodwill on both sides of this argument. William is not wrong that the optics of the Queen Consort maintaining a warm, visible friendship with someone connected to the Epstein network are damaging for the monarchy at this particular moment. He is not wrong that perceptions matter enormously right now, when public trust in the institution is already fragile. But Camilla is not simply being stubborn or reckless either. She is being asked to publicly abandon a woman she has known and trusted for 50 years, not because that woman did something criminal, but because the association is inconvenient for an institution navigating a crisis. That is a genuinely difficult ask, and Camilla's refusal to simply comply on command is, on a purely human level, understandable. The tension became publicly visible in the final months of 2025 and into early 2026. In October 2025, Camilla played a role in the decision to formally strip Andrew of his titles, a meaningful action, not nothing. She moved because Andrew's continued association with the institution was actively undermining efforts to support victims of sexual abuse, causes that Camilla has championed publicly and consistently. But it was action on her own terms, at her own pace. It was not the immediate, sweeping, publicly demonstrative break that William was demanding. Then in February 2026, Camilla tried to demonstrate her commitment to abuse survivors more directly by meeting with a French rape survivor in a publicly visible act of solidarity. The response on social media was immediate and brutal. Critics argued forcefully that you cannot credibly position yourself as a champion of abuse survivors while simultaneously maintaining a warm, visible friendship with someone connected to the financial network that surrounded the man at the center of the most prominent sexual abuse case of the century. The attack landed hard, and it made William's point for him more effectively than anything he could have said himself. He has reportedly told Camilla directly and plainly that there are no exceptions. No family loyalty, no personal history, no decades-long friendships. Anyone connected to this scandal must be publicly and visibly distanced from the crown. And if Camilla cannot accept that, William is prepared to work around her, reduce her influence, and simply wait until the moment he becomes king and Kate becomes queen consort. That is an ultimatum from a future king to a sitting queen consort. And the fact that it has been delivered, and that everyone inside the palace knows it has been delivered, tells you something extraordinary about how completely the power structure has already shifted. If the conflict between William and Camilla is fundamentally a battle over institutional strategy, the conflict between Kate and Camilla runs deeper. It is more personal, more immediate, and by many accounts more consequential for the day-to-day reality of life inside the palace. In the days and weeks following Andrew's arrest, Princess Kate was not standing quietly behind her husband offering emotional support. She was in the room. According to sources familiar with palace operations, Kate has been actively coordinating with palace staff on the public response to the Andrew crisis, consulting with legal advisors, and ensuring that William's crisis management strategy is being implemented consistently and effectively across the institution. She is not functioning as a supportive partner. She is functioning as a co-strategist. And Camilla, by multiple accounts, deeply resents it. An insider described the dynamic with unusual directness. Camilla does not like Kate getting involved. Their relationship has always carried a degree of friction, the tension between the generation that holds the title and the generation that holds the future. But now, with Kate visibly stepping into a genuine leadership role during the most serious crisis the monarchy has faced in decades, that tension has escalated into something sharper. Camilla has reportedly accused Kate of making both her and Charles look weak, as if the king cannot handle his own family's crisis without assistance from the next generation. Charles, to his considerable credit, does not see it that way. He has reportedly defended Kate consistently, telling Camilla plainly and repeatedly that Kate is only trying to help and that the monarchy needs all the help it can get. But Camilla's resentment has not disappeared. It has shaped how the palace looks from the outside. When the Andrew story broke, the image the palace projected to the world was William and Kate standing together, projecting calm and stability, demonstrating that there was a credible and composed leadership capable of steering the institution through the storm. It was Kate who was in the room during key meetings. It was Kate who helped coordinate the official statements. It was William and Kate who appeared before the cameras looking like a monarchy that was still functional, still serious, still worth trusting. Camilla was largely absent from that display, and in the monarchy, absence at moments of crisis is not neutral. It is a statement. In late February 2026, the conflict reached what insiders are describing as a breaking point. The message William delivered to Camilla was direct, unambiguous, and by the standards of how these things are usually handled inside palace walls, startlingly blunt. Either she publicly distances herself from Sarah Ferguson, demonstrating visible, credible separation from anyone connected to the Andrew and Epstein scandal, or she accepts that she is actively damaging the monarchy's reputation at the most critical moment it has faced in decades. This was not phrased as a request, it was a demand. Heirs to the throne do not typically issue ultimatums to sitting queen consorts. That is simply not how the hierarchy has historically worked. The queen consort outranks the heir apparent in terms of formal protocol. To override her publicly, to demand she change her personal behavior on pain of institutional marginalization, represents a genuinely extraordinary breach of the traditional order. But according to royal insiders, King Charles has granted William something that makes that ultimatum not just possible, but legitimate, final authority over all decisions related to the Andrew scandal and the monarchy's public reputation. He has explicitly deputized his son to act as the primary decision-maker. Not an advisor, not a participant in discussions, the person whose judgment governs the institution's response. Charles supports William's strategy completely, and without apparent reservation. Camilla does not. And that division, the reigning king aligned with his heir against his own queen consort on the most significant crisis of his reign, is as extraordinary a development as anything this family has produced in living memory. The question that now hangs over the palace is deceptively simple. Will Camilla fall in line? Will she conclude that the cost of continued resistance, accelerating her own marginalization, deepening the rift with both her husband and his heir, potentially forcing Charles into an impossible public choice between his wife and his son, is simply too high? Or will she hold her position? And if she does, what does William do next? What makes all of this more than a family drama is the broader context it sits inside. A YouGov poll from early 2026 showed that support for the monarchy among people under 45 in the United Kingdom has fallen to its lowest recorded level. Not just a dip, the lowest level ever measured. The next generation of British citizens, the people who will determine whether the monarchy survives another century or whether the quiet, persistent calls for abolition eventually gather enough force to become something real, are watching. They are watching whether the transformation William is promising is genuine, or whether it is in the end just another carefully managed royal performance designed to look like change while everything that actually matters stays exactly the same. William's blueprint for what comes next is already visible to those who have been paying close attention. He wants a smaller monarchy, fewer working royals, tighter control over who is permitted to represent the crown in public. He wants zero tolerance for scandal, with anyone who brings crisis to the institution removed immediately, regardless of blood or title, with Andrew treated not as a special case but as the first application of a new permanent standard. And he wants a more transparent, more accountable institution, one where decisions are made through clear processes, with clear ownership, and with genuine public accountability for outcomes. His management of the Duchy of Cornwall, the vast estate he inherited when Charles became king, already demonstrates what that looks like in practice. People who work with him describe a leader who challenges old assumptions, who demands genuine accountability, and who holds people responsible not just for their intentions but for their results. Let us be honest about where things actually stand. King Charles is still king. His name appears on official documents. His portrait hangs in government buildings. None of that has changed on paper. But the real authority, the strategic authority, the crisis management authority, the authority to make the decisions that will determine whether this institution survives the next decade with its credibility intact, is William's. Not officially, not through any public announcement or constitutional process, but functionally, actually, in the way that power works when it shifts from one generation to the next before the formal titles have caught up with the reality. Queen Camilla is still queen consort. She still wears the title. But the woman who is actually shaping the palace response to the most serious crisis in a generation is Kate. The woman actually in the room when the decisions are made. The woman actually coordinating the strategy. And everyone inside those palace walls knows it. The old generation is officially in charge. The new generation is actually running things. That is the extraordinary vertiginous reality of the British monarchy in the spring of 2026. And it is a reality that nobody planned for, nobody officially announced, and nobody can now reverse. The monarchy is reinventing itself. Not gracefully, not neatly, not without genuine human pain and real family cost, and the kind of bitter private arguments that leave marks that do not fully heal. But it is reinventing itself. And the man driving that reinvention is Prince William, armed with final authority from his father, backed completely by his wife, utterly convinced that the institution he is inheriting must change or face something far worse than scandal, and apparently willing to push as hard and as fast as the situation demands. If this breakdown gave you a clearer picture of what is really happening inside Buckingham Palace right now, hit the like button and subscribe, because we are tracking every development in this story as it unfolds, and the next chapter is already being written. In our next video, we go deeper into William's full blueprint for restructuring the monarchy, the specific reforms he is planning, the people he is relying on, and the battles he still has to fight to make that vision a reality. That one is coming very soon, so make sure you are subscribed and the bell is on so you do not miss it. And before you go, we want to leave you with one question, and we want your honest answer in the comments below. William is building a monarchy that operates on accountability, zero tolerance, and institutional logic. Camilla is defending something older, personal loyalty, human warmth, the idea that a 50-year friendship deserves more respect than a PR strategy. So here is the question. In your view, is a monarchy that functions like a modern corporation still capable of earning the kind of deep, lasting public trust that the institution actually needs to survive? Or does stripping away the human element, the loyalty, the imperfect personal relationships ultimately make it colder and more distant, not more trustworthy? Drop your answer in the comments. We are genuinely reading every single one.